Hello, welcome to Precon Decon, the video series where I deconstruct the pre-constructed decks of Magic the Gathering's history. In this video, I'm going to be looking at one of the Exodus pre-constructed decks. So let's dive into it with Groundbreaker. So this is a black-red deck. The theme of it is land destruction. So we're in for a fun time reviewing this. Little factoid, the box art of this baboon is a card that's not actually in the deck, which is actually weird enough to, I think, warrant mention. Maybe the original deck list had this guy. I think it's Ravenous Baboons, and it destroys land when it comes in. Maybe the original deck had it, and then it was taken out last minute or something, and they kept the box art. I don't know. But yeah, just a weird little bit of trivia. Let's look at the deck list. So, 13 creatures, 14 sorceries, 8 instants, an enchantment, and 24 land. Mana curve off to the side there. Quite a high curve. You can see there, but it tops off at 5. So let's have a look at some of these cards in a bit more detail. So, we have some black creatures. We have, 2 Dauthi Jackals, 1 Dauthi Slayer, Thrall Surgeon, and Vampire Hounds. So Dauthi Jackal, 2/1 with Shadow for 3. Sack it to destroy a blocking creature. That's okay, I guess. Dauthi Slayer has cropped up in a few decks we've looked at before. It's just 2/2 with Shadow, has to attack every turn able. Shadow, in case you're new to this series and this is the first one you're watching, Shadow was this mechanic of Tempest block. And it basically means that they can only block or be blocked by other creatures with Shadow, which most of the time means that it's basically unblockable and can't block. Just really good aggressive ability to put on kind of like these small cheap creatures, and Dauthi Slayer is obviously very aggressive because it has to attack every turn if able. Thrall Surgeon, who is just a 1/1, and you can pay 1 colours and a blacks, sacrifice him, and get to do coercion, where you look at a hand and choose a card. Can get rid of lands, which is a theme of this deck. Normally this kind of effect these days would be like non-land cards if it's like targeted discard like this. But that's that's a fairly it's a good ability which has a cheap activation on a cheap creature. So Thrall Surgeon actually pretty good. Also, creatures like this with abilities, sort of more useful at this point in the game's history because combat damage is the stack. So what you could do with this, you could block with it, potentially kill an attacking X1, or attack with the Thralls. Actually, no, you can't. It's the ability is a sorcery. Ignore everything I was going to say. But combat damage is the stack. If the ability wasn't a sorcery, then you could block with it, do damage on the stack, and then still do the ability. But it can only be done as a sorcery. Forget what I just said. Maybe I should try reading the card. But yeah, I mean, I still think that's it's still a pretty good ability, even being limited at sorcery speed. As a side note, I really hope at some point they find better wording than activate this ability only as any time you could play a sorcery, because that's very clunky wording. I don't know if it's worth, at some point in the future, they might keyword it or give it a special symbol or something. I don't know. But yeah. And then Vampire Hounds, which is 2/2 for 3, discard a creature card, gets +2/+2 until end of turn. That's okay. But then this is in a deck where there's actually not that many creature cards. I don't think there were 13. So maybe not the best inclusion to have this. But the fact that it's not a free ability, you have to discard a creature card. But the fact it doesn't cost any mana is kind of okay, and could suddenly be a surprise 2/2. You could suddenly just pump it up to safely block or kill a blocker. Yeah, I think it's fine. There are definitely worse black creatures. And then the other sort of set creatures. So we have 3 anarchists. So when he enters battlefield, you get a sorcery back into your hand from your graveyard. This deck is mostly sorceries because it's a bunch of land destruction spells. So you know, if you really want to make life miserable, you can get extra value out of those land destruction spells by recurring them from your graveyard and playing them again. Obviously, it's quite expensive at 5 mana, but yeah, it's like it's good effect. Scalding Salamander is this weird little guy. So it's what, 2/1 for 3, 0 mana, does 1 damage to each creature without flying, defending player controls, plays ability only if he's attacking and only once in turn. That's actually not a terrible card. I think even by today's standards, that's alright. Just to kind of do 1 damage to your opponent's whole side of the board, you know, apart from stuff with flying. But that's pretty good. You know, at this time, you know, creatures were a lot smaller than they are these days. So like 1 damage would have been like fairly significant. Yeah, there's a lot of 2/1s and 1/1s that, you know, are reliant on kind of pump abilities to like be good. I think like a big thing at the time was, you know, creatures are inherently like maybe a little bit weak and were very reliant on kind of auras or +1 cannons to actually become large, because large creatures usually had horrible buybacks, which we can see here with Monstrous Hound, which is just a 4/4 with 4, a 4/4 for 4 mana. Too many fours in that sentence. And like has no abilities, doesn't have like trample or like, you know, can't be blocked or anything like that. Just basically a vanilla 4/4 with a drawback. And it's a rare as well. It's almost like, you know, like, oh well, we've got to give it a drawback because, well, a 4/4 for 4 is too much. So it can't attack unless you control more lands than the defending player, and it cannot block unless you control more lands than the attacking player. So in this deck, it sort of synergizes well because you've got a lot of land destruction, so you normally will have more lands than your opponent. But I don't like. It's so weird, like looking back at these old cards and seeing like what constituted as like a rare. Because I would say like Scalding Salamander is better than Monstrous Hound. I'd say Anarchist is better than Monstrous Hound. Like, just, you know, a vanilla 4/4, no evasion ability, no combat abilities. Like his text box is just drawback. It's just very weird to see like how far we've come in terms of like Magic card design. And then one of the other rares in the deck is Thopter Squadron. So this is kind of this reminds me of Pentavus actually from like from the first Mirrodin set. This is kind of like a bad Pentavus, or like Pentavus's ancestor. So what? It's 0/0 flyer, comes in with 3+1/+ counters. Remove a counter from it and create a Thopter token. Pay 1, sacrifice the Thopter, put a counter back on Thopter Squadron, so it can spread itself out, become a bunch of token flyers, or it can be, you know, a 3/3 flyer on its own. But obviously, like a 3/3 flyer for 5 mana is not wonderful, but at the time it would have been okay, I guess. Especially artifacts were usually kind of bad. Or, you know, if they weren't completely broken, there's probably like a small percentage of artifacts that are very, very good at this time, but most of them are kind of like a little bit bad. But this one's, I think, is kind of just average. Like, I think if we saw this these days, it would be like an uncommon and probably even, you know, buffed up in some way. But I think this is fine. It doesn't really, I feel, fit the theme of this deck. It feels like kind of just a random card that's just been thrown in to like make up space, but I think it's fine. So this is the meat of the deck, is just a load of land destruction spells. So, right, so 2 Aftershocks, which can just destroy an artifact, a creature, or a land, and it does 3 damage to you. Weird that to see a red spell that just does an outright destroy a creature. Yeah, it's not an effect that red normally gets, but like it's kind of, you know, flexible in that way. Flowstone Flood. So in in the previous video we had Forbid. That was a counter spell with buyback, which would have been a miserable time. So now we have a land destruction spell with buyback. And what's the buyback? You just pay some life and discard a card at random, which is like, that's quite a steep cost. But the fact that it's a land destruction spell with buyback is just mad to me. That like you could, yeah, if you wanted to, yeah, you play this, you know, happily pay 3 life and discard a card round. Say you've got like a handful of like junk you don't mind. But the thing is, like, you wouldn't mind, I don't think, like doing the buyback on this, because the thing about land destruction is it's it's such an inherently unfun mechanic. Like, you take resources away from someone and you stop them playing the game. That's why we don't really see like land destruction hardly ever anymore. The last land destruction spell I can think of was Star of Extinction, I think, from Ixalan. There might have been another one since then, but that's the last one I can really think of, and that was like really expensive. I mean, because it did other stuff as well. But yeah, barely like see land destruction anymore. And just here we've got Aftershock, Stone Rain, Rain of Tears, all from the same set. And it's just, it's just, I don't know. Old school Magic was like kind of merciless. It was like, yeah, the creatures weren't very. The creatures were kind of weak, and the spells were like quite strong. And I think we've had maybe a little, flip of that. In modern design, like nowadays, like creatures are usually very, very good, and spells are still good as well, but like creatures have definitely been buffed up. They've definitely been hitting the gym. But yeah, a land destruction spell with buyback would be miserable for an opponent, I think, because I say you get locked out, you can't play your cards. And then a full playset of Stone Rain. Oh, Stone Rain. I love Stone Rain. I just say I hate land destruction, but like Stone Rain is like such a good classic card. Really nice actually see that it's a full playset of it in the deck as well. Like, I really like when a pre-constructed deck gives you a full playset of stuff. Because I've not really talked about it, in this series yet, but there was this thing of pre-constructed decks where you would buy two of them and mash them together basically, and like get double copies of like all the good cards, and that was definitely a thing that younger me and friends used to do. Buy two copies of the same deck just to get double up on the rares and stuff. And then 3 Rain of Tears, which it's just Stone Rain but black and a bit harder to cast because of the double color investment. And then just a slew of more removal cards just in case your opponent gets through all your land destruction and manages to get something on the board. Well, you can sweep their board with Evancast Justice, which is 2 damage to everything, and it's another card with buyback. Nausea is just a -1/-1 to the whole board. Diabolic Edict, 3 of those to make someone sacrifice a creature. Searing Touch, which is just 1 damage with buyback, and then 3 Shocks, which is 2 damage to anything. So like a really good array of removal options there. Okay, so if they get past the land destruction and manage to get something on the board, they're probably not going to keep it for long. And then, so this is the 3rd rare in the deck, Varrots Dungeon, which is kind of like this weird old black enchantment. So colors, two colors, 2 black. Any player can pay 5 life during their turn to destroy Varrots Dungeon. Choose and discard a card. Target player chooses a card in their hand and puts it on top of their library, plays ability sorcery. So by discarding card, you it's kind of like time. It's like a really bad time walk effect, essentially. Like, you're just locking someone out. You'd be like, they have to put a card back on top of their deck, denying them a new draw. So on top of all the land destruction, you can then start. This deck is like a really miserable time to play against for someone, I think. That you could blow up all their lands, kill all their creatures, and then lock them out of drawing new cards. Yeah. And then Necrologia, which is, I guess it's trying to be like a fixed Necropotence. So 3 colors, 2 black. Play it only during your discard phase. Pay X life, draw X cards. That's still like a very powerful effect. It's obviously limited by having like this weird time it can only be played during basically the end of your turn, but that's a very strong effect. And it's crazy. This is uncommon. I would have thought this would have been rare. But yeah, Necrologia, fun, quite a fun card. Paying life for cards is always good. I think I'm going to go off on a little tangent here, but I think that's always like a turning point in like a player's skill level. Because like when you're new, like I always feel like life gain is, you value it more. And you don't want to pay life for things because, like, oh, if I pay life, then it's easy for my opponent to kill me because I have less life. and there's that moment, I think, in player skill when you realise, like, oh, I don't mind paying life to get more resources if it's going to help me win. Because like, I mean, I'm not trying to gatekeep or anything. Back in the day, like Phyrexian Arena, I'd be like, oh, that's really bad. You lose a life every turn. It's just like, well, it's obviously a very good card. Anyway, so yeah, what could have been? I mean, I think this deck is, as miserable as it would be to play against, I think it is like quite well put together. I mean, it has a theme and it sticks to it. I mean, can't disparage it for that. But I thought, these are just some cool kind of like black-red cards that could have gone into it. So Pitspawn, just a big 7-mana, 6/4 first strike. You have to pay mana to keep it around, and if it damages anything, it's exiled. I think that's just kind of fun and big and dumb. Maybe that instead of Varrots Dungeon, maybe. Mind Maggots, which are, I mean, firstly super gross, but when they enter the battlefield, discarding a number of creature cards. For every card discarded, they get 2 +1/+1 counters. So, actually, for 4 mana and discarding a creature card, they're a 4/4, which is actually a pretty good rate. Ogre Shaman, 3/3, 2, discard a card at random, does 2 damage to a creature or player. That's fine, I guess. The discard at random is like such an inherently like red ability, like at this time, just like, oh man, like what would make it more red? Oh, we make the discard completely random. Obviously discard at random is horrible, and has like these big potential like feel bad moments, like you discard a card at random and it's a card you kind of wanted to play. You can obviously wait until you have a handful of cards that you don't mind losing, but yeah. And then Sabertooth Wyvern, just a 3/2 flying first strike for 5. I think that's still actually okay by today's standards. Like maybe a little overcosted, but yeah, it would have been a fine card to have, like just something. Because the thing is, like, okay, you use land destruction, you blow up all their lands. You still need a way to win. I mean, although opponent might be likely to forfeit. I don't know. But having a way to win after you blow up all the lands, I mean, some of these creatures would have been a good way of actually closing out the game, like ending your opponent's misery. But yeah, so in summary, that's Groundbreaker. I say, like, in terms of like its deck list, I think it is decently put together. It does stick to its strategy, its horrible, horrible strategy of land destruction. Yeah. Did you ever have this deck? Did you have fun playing it? Did your opponents not have fun playing against it? Put a comment below. I'd like to hear about it. But yeah, I'll be back next time with a look at another Exodus pre-constructed deck. Until then, thank you for listening. Have a good day.